It was a night full of glitz and glamour at one of the most luxurious parties of the year. The billionaire, Nathaniel Weston, was at the center of it all, surrounded by the world's most influential people. He was a man who had everything: money, fame, power, and he knew how to enjoy life to its fullest. But despite his wealth, he felt something was missing. The conversations, the business deals, the expensive drinks, none of it truly satisfied him anymore. He was used to people adoring him for his money and status, but Nathaniel longed for something more real. That's when the conversation turned to an unusual topic: betting. Some of his friends dared him to do something that would challenge his ego. They knew Nathaniel loved a good challenge, but they also knew that he never took anything too seriously. So one friend, Samuel, made a bold bet. "Nathaniel, I bet you can't marry a homeless woman. Someone with nothing, just to prove you have the guts to do it. And make it real, not just a publicity stunt." The room went quiet as all eyes turned toward Nathaniel. His friends knew he could do anything, but this, marrying a homeless woman for a bet, seemed ridiculous. But Nathaniel was never one to back down from a dare. He laughed it off at first, but the idea stuck in his mind. It was a challenge that seemed almost too easy. "I'll do it," he said, his voice calm but filled with the usual confidence that had made him a billionaire. "I'll marry a homeless mother of twins. I'll prove you all wrong." His friends were skeptical, but they accepted the challenge, agreeing that they would make it a public spectacle if Nathaniel succeeded. What his friends didn't know, though, was that Nathaniel had no intention of simply fulfilling the bet. He was intrigued by the idea of marrying someone who had nothing, someone who wasn't interested in his wealth or fame. The idea felt liberating. So the game began, and Nathaniel set out to find a woman who matched the description he had given: a homeless mother of twins. It didn't take long for Nathaniel to find her. Her name was Sarah, and she was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. Sarah had a quiet strength that immediately caught his attention. She was sitting outside a rundown shelter, her twins playing beside her in the dirt. Her clothes were worn and tattered, and her face showed the hardship of life on the streets, but there was something about her that drew him in. She wasn't desperate for charity. In fact, she seemed proud, her eyes sharp and alert as she looked after her children. Nathaniel had seen hundreds of people in his world of luxury, but none had the presence that Sarah did. Approaching her was easier than he expected, but when he tried to speak, she was cautious. She eyed him with suspicion, not buying his suave smile or polished appearance. "What do you want?" Sarah asked bluntly, her voice wary but strong. Nathaniel, taken aback by her directness, was momentarily speechless. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone with so little. After a brief moment of hesitation, Nathaniel explained his proposition. He told her about the bet, how he had made it for fun, how he wanted to marry her, not for charity, but as part of this challenge. Sarah listened quietly, her expression unreadable. He couldn't tell if she was insulted, curious, or amused. But one thing was clear: she wasn't going to fall for his charm easily. In fact, she refused him outright, telling him to leave. She had no interest in becoming part of his rich, flashy world. She didn't need his money or his pity. Nathaniel was taken aback by her response. He had never been refused, especially not so quickly and so firmly. For a moment, he almost walked away, but something inside him shifted. He wanted to know more about this woman. What made her so different from everyone else? Why wasn't she impressed by his wealth or status? Determined, he came back the next day, this time with a different approach. Instead of offering money or shelter, he sat down beside her and asked about her life, her struggles, and her children. He found himself listening intently as she spoke about the challenges she faced every day, how she had lost everything but refused to give up. For the first time in years, Nathaniel was not thinking about business deals or luxury cars. He was completely immersed in her story. The bet was still in his mind, but he couldn't deny the admiration he felt for her. Nathaniel was starting to see Sarah not as a challenge to be conquered, but as someone with a quiet, incredible strength. He was drawn to her resilience and bravery in the face of everything life had thrown her way. What started as a dare, a game to amuse his friends, was quickly becoming something much more meaningful. Nathaniel returned the next day, determined to prove to Sarah that his intentions were more genuine than she might have thought. But when he arrived, he found her sitting on a bench with her twins, the children quietly playing with whatever small toys they had managed to scrounge. Their laughter echoed softly in the air, a stark contrast to the grim surroundings of the homeless shelter. The twins, a boy and a girl, were about 5 years old, bright-eyed and full of life despite the tough circumstances they lived in. It was impossible to ignore how much Sarah cared for them, how devoted she was to her children. When Sarah saw him, she didn't immediately ask him to leave this time. Instead, she looked at him with suspicion, still unsure of his true intentions. "Why are you back?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unkind. Nathaniel could feel the weight of her gaze, the quiet challenge in it. He knew she wasn't one to trust easily, and he respected that. She had every right to question him, especially considering the bet he had made. Nathaniel sat down a few feet away from her, taking a more humble approach than he had the first time. He had already realized that offering her money or shelter wouldn't work. She wasn't interested in charity, so instead of bringing up the bet again, he tried to understand her. He started asking her questions about her life, how she ended up on the streets, what it had been like to raise 2 children without a home, and how she had managed to keep going every day. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then sighed, glancing down at the ground. "You want to know my story?" she asked, her tone a mix of resignation and weariness. Nathaniel nodded, quietly. Sarah hesitated, but then she began to speak. She told him about losing her job after her mother's sudden death, how she had struggled to keep the family together when everything started falling apart. She shared how she had lost her home, her savings, and eventually even her dignity as she was forced to move from one shelter to another. As she spoke, Nathaniel listened intently. He was struck by her honesty, her vulnerability, and her courage in the face of unimaginable hardships. She wasn't seeking sympathy, and she wasn't asking for pity. She was simply telling him the truth, and it made Nathaniel realize just how wrong he had been about her. Sarah was not a helpless woman to be saved. She was a fighter, and she had been fighting for her children every day, doing whatever she could to survive. There was a quiet strength in her words, something Nathaniel hadn't expected. He had assumed she would be bitter or resentful, but instead, she spoke with a level of grace and dignity that made him rethink everything he had believed about people in her situation. Sarah wasn't asking for a handout. She was doing what she had to do to keep her family alive, and Nathaniel couldn't help but respect that. He looked at the twins, playing contentedly with their toys, and then at Sarah. It struck him that this woman, despite everything she had endured, still managed to hold on to her sense of self. She wasn't defined by her circumstances. She was defined by her resilience, by her love for her children. Nathaniel felt a stirring in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something that made him want to help her in a way that was different from anything he had considered before. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I want to help you, Sarah, not because of the bet, but because I see something in you. I see strength, and I see someone who deserves a chance at a better life." Sarah looked at him skeptically, and Nathaniel could feel the walls she had built around herself. But he wasn't giving up. "I know I can't change everything for you overnight, but I want to be there, however I can." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Nathaniel held his breath, waiting for her response. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not interested in your money, Nathaniel. But if you want to help, then maybe we can talk about it." She didn't smile, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hope, maybe, or the first sign of trust. It was a small step, but it felt like a breakthrough. Nathaniel stood up, feeling a sense of accomplishment, though he knew this was only the beginning. He had come to marry a woman as part of a bet, but now he was beginning to see Sarah for who she really was. And that changed everything. The next few days passed in a blur as Nathaniel found himself thinking about Sarah more and more. He couldn't get the image of her quiet strength, her determination, and the way she loved her children so deeply, out of his mind. He had originally set out to fulfill a silly bet, but now he felt a deep respect for Sarah that he hadn't anticipated. He was no longer focused on the challenge. He was focused on her. After their last conversation, Nathaniel had asked Sarah to meet him again, this time not with a proposition, but simply to talk. They met at the same spot, where Sarah was sitting with her twins. The children were playing in the dirt, their laughter filling the air. It was a strange contrast to the harsh realities of their lives. Nathaniel noticed that despite the challenges, Sarah always made sure they had moments like this, moments of happiness, no matter how small. As Nathaniel sat down beside her, he took a deep breath. "I meant what I said, Sarah," he began. "I want to help you, not because of some bet, but because I believe you and your children deserve a better life." Sarah looked at him, her eyes cautious. "I've heard that before," she said softly. "People offer help, but they always want something in return. And I can't let my kids grow up thinking that they owe someone something for kindness." Nathaniel understood her hesitation. People in her life had probably let her down before, promising help but never delivering. He knew that trust didn't come easily for someone who had been let down so many times. Still, he wasn't going to give up. "I'm not asking for anything in return," he said, his voice steady. "I just want to see you and your kids get the chance you deserve. You don't have to accept anything right now, but I'm here, and I'll prove that I'm serious." For a long moment, Sarah didn't speak. She simply stared ahead, her face unreadable. Nathaniel waited patiently, knowing that this wasn't something that could be rushed. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet. "Why me?" she asked. "Why did you choose me for this bet in the first place? There are so many people out there who have more than I do, who have a better shot at a life with all the things that come with it. Why me?" Nathaniel felt a pang in his chest. He hadn't expected her to ask that question, and he wasn't entirely sure how to answer it. At first, it was just a bet, he admitted, his voice honest. "But after meeting you, I realized something. I've been surrounded by people my whole life who have everything, but they don't have what you have. You've got a heart full of love, and a strength that most people can't even begin to understand. I don't know why I picked you, but now that I've gotten to know you, I can't just walk away. You and your kids deserve more, and I want to help you get there." Sarah looked at him, her expression softening slightly, though she was still cautious. She didn't say anything at first, but Nathaniel could see that she was thinking about it. After a long silence, she finally spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what it's like, Nathaniel. You don't know what it feels like to have everything taken from you and have no control over it. You don't know what it's like to fight every day just to survive." Nathaniel felt his heart sink as he listened to her words. He had never truly understood what it meant to fight for survival, not the way Sarah had. He had grown up with everything he could ever want, and his biggest concerns were always related to his businesses or investments. He had never been forced to question his own survival, and that realization hit him hard. "No, I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help you and your kids. I'm not going to force you to accept anything, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that I'm serious." Sarah looked at him for a long time, her gaze searching his face, as if looking for any sign of dishonesty. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," she said, her voice low. "But I'm willing to give you a chance to prove yourself." Nathaniel felt a rush of relief. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for, but it was a start. He knew this wouldn't be easy, and he knew there would be many more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, He felt like he was on the right path. This wasn't about the bet anymore. It was about doing the right thing. And he was willing to do whatever it took to prove that to Sarah. As the days passed, Nathaniel and Sarah began to spend more time together, but their lives remained worlds apart. Nathaniel would visit her at the shelter, bringing food and supplies for her and the children. He had hoped that this simple gesture would show Sarah that he was serious about his offer to help, but he soon realized that things weren't as straightforward as he had hoped. Sarah was grateful for the help, but it was clear she wasn't comfortable with the charity. She didn't want to be seen as someone who relied on the generosity of others, especially not someone who had been homeless for so long. She was used to doing things on her own, scraping by, finding ways to make the best of what little she had. Her pride wasn't in her material possessions, but in the way she could take care of her children without asking for anything in return. Nathaniel tried his best to understand, but it was hard for him. His life had always been about abundance, having everything he wanted at his fingertips. He had never been in a situation where he didn't have a choice, where every decision had to be carefully weighed because there were no other options. But the more he got to know Sarah, the more he admired her strength. She had been through so much, and yet she carried herself with a grace and dignity that many of his high society friends could never understand. It wasn't just Sarah who was adjusting. Nathaniel was too. Living in his mansion, surrounded by luxury, he had never once questioned what it meant to truly struggle. But seeing the way Sarah lived, how she worked so hard just to make sure her children were safe and cared for, began to change his perspective. He could no longer look at his life in the same way. The things that had once seemed so important to him, the money, the status, the endless business meetings, began to feel insignificant compared to the strength and resilience Sarah had shown. But it wasn't easy for either of them. Sarah was still wary of Nathaniel's intentions. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing all of this because of the bet, because he wanted to prove something to his friends. She appreciated his efforts, but there were moments when she couldn't help but question whether he truly understood her struggle. Sometimes, when she saw him sitting in his opulent mansion, surrounded by wealth and luxury, she wondered if he really knew what it felt like to fight for every meal, to worry about where you'd sleep at night. Nathaniel could see the doubt in her eyes, and it hurt him. He had started this journey with a bet, but now he was fighting for something much more real. Her trust. He knew he had a long way to go, but he was willing to do whatever it took to show her that he wasn't just a wealthy man trying to prove a point. He was someone who saw her for who she truly was, a strong, capable woman who had fought through unimaginable hardships. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Nathaniel invited Sarah to come with him to his mansion for a meal. He knew she would probably decline, but he wanted to try again. He didn't want her to feel like he was imposing, but he also wanted to give her a glimpse into his world, not to impress her, but to show her that he wasn't just a stranger offering help from a distance. To his surprise, Sarah agreed. She was hesitant at first, but after some thought, she decided that it might be a step in the right direction. She wanted to understand Nathaniel better, to see if he really was the person he claimed to be. She told him she would bring the twins with her, and Nathaniel agreed without hesitation. The dinner was simple but meaningful. They sat at the large dining table, and Nathaniel watched as Sarah interacted with her children. There was a warmth between them, an unspoken bond that was evident in the way she cared for them. Her love for her kids was clear in every action, every word she spoke. Nathaniel couldn't help but admire her even more. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than Nathaniel had expected. They talked about their pasts, their struggles, and the things they dreamed of. For Sarah, it was the first time in a long while that she felt like she could truly relax. She had always been on guard, always trying to protect her children, never allowing herself to be vulnerable. But as she listened to Nathaniel speak, she began to realize that he wasn't just offering her material wealth. He was offering her a chance to start over, to build a future where she didn't have to struggle every day. And for the first time, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, it was possible. As the weeks passed, Nathaniel and Sarah's relationship began to evolve in ways neither of them had expected. What had started as a seemingly strange bet was now developing into something far deeper, something real. Nathaniel was no longer just trying to prove a point to his friends. He genuinely wanted to help Sarah and her children, but more than that, he was beginning to understand the complexities of her life and the strength that came with it. For Sarah, it wasn't easy to accept Nathaniel's help. Every time he offered something, whether it was clothes for the children, extra food, or even a night in a guest room at his mansion, she hesitated. She didn't want to be seen as a charity case. For years, she had taken care of her twins without asking anyone for help, and it was hard to let go of that pride. But slowly, as she spent more time with Nathaniel, she began to see that he wasn't offering help out of pity. He wasn't trying to change her or fix her. He just wanted to be a partner, to make things easier for her in any way he could. Nathaniel had started to realize that he didn't need to rush things. He knew Sarah wasn't ready to fully trust him yet, and he didn't expect her to. But he also knew that actions spoke louder than words. It wasn't about what he could give her in terms of material things. It was about showing her that he respected her, that he valued her for who she was. And so, he kept offering small gestures of kindness. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful actions. He would bring her a cup of coffee when he visited, or offer to take the twins to the park for a few hours, so she could have some time to herself. One afternoon, Nathaniel invited Sarah to join him for a walk through the nearby park. The weather had been warm, and he thought it would be a good chance for them to talk without the pressures of their usual routine. When Sarah arrived with the twins in tow, she looked a bit uncertain, but she agreed to join him. Nathaniel had always been comfortable in his world of business meetings and events, but this was different. He wasn't worried about impressing anyone. He just wanted to spend time with Sarah and get to know her better. They walked through the park together, the twins running ahead, their laughter filling the air. Sarah and Nathaniel fell into a natural rhythm, walking side by side. For the first time, the conversation felt easy. They talked about simple things, life in the city, their favorite books, and what they wanted for the future. Sarah was still cautious, but she seemed more relaxed than usual. It was as if, in that moment, she allowed herself to enjoy the quiet peace that came from just being with someone without any expectations. For Nathaniel, it was an eye-opening experience. He had always been driven by ambition, constantly focused on his career and the next big project. But walking beside Sarah, watching her interact with her children, he realized how much he had been missing. The simplicity of the moment, the connection they shared. It felt more fulfilling than anything he had ever experienced before. He could see how much Sarah valued the little things in life. A day in the park with her kids, a good conversation, the joy of just being present. As they sat on a bench, watching the children play nearby, Nathaniel felt a shift within himself. He had entered this situation to prove a point, to win a bet. But now, he understood that his connection with Sarah was about much more than that. He wasn't trying to save her or fix her life. He was just trying to build a future with someone who had shown him what it really meant to fight for what mattered. Sarah, too, was beginning to change. As much as she had been wary of Nathaniel's intentions, she started to realize that he wasn't like the others who had tried to offer help, but had expected something in return. Nathaniel's actions spoke volumes. He respected her independence, her strength, and her love for her children. He wasn't trying to take over her life or dictate what she should do. He was simply offering a hand to help her stand a little taller. As the weeks went by, things began to change in ways that neither Nathaniel nor Sarah had anticipated. Their relationship was still new, still fragile, but it was growing stronger with each passing day. Sarah had started to open up more, letting Nathaniel into her world in a way that she had never allowed anyone before. And Nathaniel, for his part, was more than willing to meet her halfway. He was no longer concerned with the bet or what others thought. He was focused on her children, and on the possibility of building something real together. But even as their connection deepened, they both knew there were still obstacles ahead. Sarah's trust, though growing, was still cautious. She had lived through so much, and the scars from her past ran deep. She had been let down before, and she wasn't about to let her guard down completely. Nathaniel understood that, and he was willing to wait, willing to prove himself with his actions rather than words. It wasn't easy for either of them, but they were slowly figuring it out. One evening, as they sat together in Nathaniel's mansion, the subject of Sarah's past came up. She had never fully explained what had led her to become homeless, and Nathaniel had always been curious, though he had never pushed her for answers. But tonight, as they sat side by side on the couch, there was a quiet moment of vulnerability in the air. Sarah looked at him, her expression serious but not guarded. "You've been so kind to me and the kids, Nathaniel," she began, her voice soft. "And I've started to trust you. But there's something I need to tell you, something you might not understand." Nathaniel turned to face her, his heart racing. He had always known that Sarah's past wasn't something she could easily talk about, and he had respected her space. But now, as she spoke, he felt a wave of concern wash over him. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," he said gently, not wanting to push her. "No, I don't want to," Sarah replied. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I grew up in a good home, with 2 parents who cared about me. But when I was a teenager, things started to fall apart. My parents divorced, and after that, everything seemed to go wrong. I had to drop out of school to help take care of my mom, who fell ill. And then, when she passed away, I was left with nothing. I tried to hold things together, but the bills piled up, and soon I couldn't keep up. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was on the streets." Nathaniel listened quietly, his heart heavy as he heard the pain in her words. He had always known that Sarah's life hadn't been easy, but hearing it from her, hearing the depth of her struggles, made him realize just how much she had endured. She wasn't just a mother trying to survive. She was someone who had fought tooth and nail to keep going, even when everything seemed to be against her. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea." He reached out and gently took her hand in his, not knowing exactly what to say but wanting her to know that he cared, that he wasn't judging her for anything. Sarah shook her head, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "It's not your fault. I never wanted anyone to feel sorry for me. I didn't know where to turn. And when I had the twins, it became even harder. They were my responsibility, and I had to keep fighting. I couldn't let them see me break down." Nathaniel squeezed her hand, his heart aching for her. He admired her strength more than ever, but he also understood that there was so much more to her than just survival. She was a woman with dreams, with hopes, and with a heart full of love for her children. And she deserved so much more than what life had given her. "I don't want you to carry all of this alone anymore," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice steady. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to be there for you now. You and the kids deserve a future where you don't have to worry about surviving every day. I want to help you build that future, if you'll let me." Sarah looked at him, her expression softening. "I don't know, Nathaniel. I don't know if I can trust anyone like that. I've had people promise to help me before, but they've always had their own agendas. They always want something in return." Nathaniel nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I don't want anything from you, Sarah. Not in exchange for anything. I just want to help you build the life you deserve. And if that means taking it one step at a time, then I'm willing to do that." There was a long pause as Sarah stared at him, her thoughts clearly racing. Nathaniel could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he was different from everyone else who had tried to offer her help, but the scars of her past were hard to forget. As the days passed, Nathaniel and Sarah grew closer. The bond between them had transformed from an awkward connection into something more meaningful, something they could both feel. Sarah had started to trust him more, letting her guard down bit by bit, but she still carried the weight of her past with her. She was constantly cautious, unsure whether Nathaniel's feelings were truly genuine or if he was just caught up in the idea of saving her. After all, her whole life had been full of people who promised help but never followed through. Nathaniel, on the other hand, found himself falling for her in ways he hadn't expected. He had entered this situation with a sense of duty, wanting to fulfill his bet and prove a point. But now, he had discovered something far more important. Sarah wasn't just someone to help or fix. She was a woman of incredible strength, intelligence, and love. He saw in her a depth that he admired more than anything, and he wanted to be a part of her life, not out of obligation, but because he truly cared. One evening, as they sat in the living room of Nathaniel's home, there was a quiet moment between them. The twins were playing in the other room, and for the first time, it was just the two of them. Nathaniel took a deep breath, unsure of how to continue the conversation that had been weighing on his mind for days. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Sarah turned to him, her expression cautious. She could tell that he was serious, and that made her nervous. She had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for him to reveal some hidden agenda or to tell her that he was pulling away. But what Nathaniel said next caught her completely off guard. "I know that I've made mistakes," he continued, "and I know that it's going to take time for you to truly trust me. But I want you to know something. When I first came to you, it was for the bet. But that's not why I'm here anymore. I'm here because I care about you, Sarah. I care about you and your children more than I ever thought possible." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions, hope, fear, and uncertainty. She had never let anyone get this close to her, especially after everything she had been through. But Nathaniel was different. He wasn't like the others who had offered her help with strings attached. He had been there for her, not expecting anything in return, and he had shown her kindness in ways she hadn't experienced in years. "I don't want to be someone's project," Sarah said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I've spent my whole life fighting just to survive. I've had to fight to take care of my kids, to keep a roof over our heads. I don't know how to just let someone in like that." Nathaniel reached across the table and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I know, Sarah," he said softly. "I know you've been through more than anyone should have to go through. But I'm not trying to fix you. I'm not trying to make you someone you're not. I just want to be there for you. If you'll let me, I want to help you build the life you deserve, not because you need saving, but because you deserve happiness." There was a long silence as Sarah processed his words. She looked down at their hands, feeling the warmth of his touch and the sincerity in his voice. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, a hope that maybe she didn't have to do everything on her own. Maybe, just maybe, it was okay to lean on someone else. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust again, to let someone in. I've been alone for so long, Nathaniel. I've had to rely on myself and my kids. I'm scared." Nathaniel nodded, understanding her fear. He had seen it in her eyes before. The fear of being let down, the fear of trusting someone only to have them leave. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was willing to give her the space and time she needed. "I'm not asking you to jump in and trust me right away," Nathaniel said softly. "I'm asking you for a chance to prove that I'm here for you, that I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait for you, Sarah, whatever it takes." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief. She had spent so long carrying the weight of her past, the burden of having to do everything on her own, that she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone else in. "I don't know if I can ever fully trust again," she said, her voice shaky. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes. For us." As the weeks continued to pass, Nathaniel and Sarah began to forge a new life together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had both come a long way, and though there were still moments of doubt, they were learning how to navigate the complexities of their growing relationship. The bond between them had shifted from something built on obligation to something rooted in mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection. Sarah had allowed herself to trust Nathaniel more, and though she still carried the weight of her past, she felt a sense of relief that she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't constantly on guard anymore, at least not around him. She could finally breathe without the fear of someone taking advantage of her vulnerability. Nathaniel had proven time and again that he wasn't here for a project or out of pity. He was here because he cared about her, for who she was. For Nathaniel, it had been an eye-opening experience. He had come into this situation thinking he was just helping someone, but he had learned so much about himself, about patience, and about what it really meant to care for someone. He had come to realize that money and status didn't matter as much as he had once believed. What truly mattered was the people in his life, and Sarah had quickly become the most important person in his world. One afternoon, as Nathaniel and Sarah were sitting in the living room with the twins playing nearby, the conversation turned toward the future. Sarah had been quiet for a while, and Nathaniel could sense that she was thinking deeply about something. He didn't want to rush her, but he knew that now was as good a time as any to bring up the subject that had been on his mind for days. "Sarah," he began, his voice gentle, "we've come a long way together, haven't we? I know we've still got a long way to go, but I'm wondering, what do you see for the future? What do you want for you and the kids?" Sarah looked at him, her gaze thoughtful. She had been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day, that she hadn't really thought much about the future. But now, sitting in Nathaniel's comfortable home, with her children playing and safe, she realized she had the opportunity to dream again. For so long, all she had wanted was to survive, to keep her kids safe and fed. But now she was starting to think about what she wanted beyond just surviving. "I never really thought about it," she said quietly. "It's always been about getting by, making sure the kids are okay. But now, with you, things are different. I think I want more. I want stability for the kids, a place where they can grow up without worrying about where we'll sleep or what we'll eat. I want them to have opportunities, things I never had. And for me, I want peace. I want to stop worrying every day." Nathaniel listened intently, his heart swelling with pride for Sarah. She had always been so focused on others, on her children, and now he could see her starting to think about herself too. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. He wanted to help her get there, to help her create the future she had dreamed of. "I want that for you too," Nathaniel said softly. "I want to help you and the kids get everything you deserve. And I want to be a part of it. I don't want to just be someone who's helping from the outside. I want to be there with you, building that future together." For a moment, Sarah just looked at him, her emotions clear in her eyes. She had been so afraid to trust again, so hesitant to let anyone in. But Nathaniel had shown her time and time again that he wasn't like the others. He wasn't offering help with conditions or promises of something in return. He was offering his heart, his support, and his commitment. "I never thought I could have this," Sarah whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I never thought I could have a life like this, with someone who really cares. I've been alone for so long." "You're not alone anymore, Sarah," Nathaniel said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You and the kids are part of my life now, and I'm not going anywhere." That was the moment that solidified it for both of them. Sarah had always feared that people would leave, that they would get tired of her struggles, or that they would see her as too much of a burden. But Nathaniel had proven that he was different. He had shown her time and time again that he was here for the long haul, and that he wasn't going anywhere. They sat together in comfortable silence, knowing that there was still much to figure out, but feeling a sense of peace that had been so elusive in their lives. They were on the right path now, together. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt hopeful. Nathaniel leaned over and kissed her forehead gently. "We've got this, Sarah. We've got each other." Sarah smiled, the weight of her past slowly lifting. "Yeah, We do.